Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Zenphi webinars. Today is all about cybersecurity, and we'll be talking about enhancing security in Google Workspace. Before we get started, I'd like to walk you through some housekeeping items. Just as a reminder, this session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available after a few days to all of you. Also, if you've got any questions throughout the session, please feel free to use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. At the right time, we'll ask a question from our guest speaker, or I'll try to answer the question. So today, as the name suggests, enhancing cybersecurity in Google Workspace, we'll be talking all about cybersecurity. As a first part of the webinar, we'll be tapping into our guest speaker's experience and knowledge in the domain. And then later, I'll move forward and show you how automation, and specifically Zenphi, can help you in this space. So today, we are very fortunate to have one of the great leaders in cybersecurity, someone who has been really helping us as well throughout our journey at Zenphi along the way. So Andy Sommer. Without further ado, I'd like to invite Andy Sommer to the stage and give the opportunity to Andy to introduce himself. Let me bring Andy on board. Yeah, there it is. Welcome, Andy. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Vahid. Thank you so much for having me on, and it's a pleasure to be here talking about a topic that's very close to my heart. If I talk a little bit about my experience in cybersecurity, started a while ago, 15 odd years ago now, I'm showing my age, working with the likes of Symantec and Message Labs. And back then, it was very much signature-based technology, which was really looking at the impact of malware, and then organizations like Nuix and Tier 3, Huntsman Security now, which is more Australia sort of focus. And then recently, in the last few years, I've been working with CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike has obviously went through a massive shift in terms of its growth and in terms of its impact in the cybersecurity space. I left CrowdStrike recently to start my own company, the Summit Agency, providing communications, strategy, and content support for technology and security organizations. And that's where I am today.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, tap into your experience, get your advice on these topics. Before we go to the next slide, for the people who don't know, my name is Vahid Taslimi as well. I'm your host today. I'm the co-founder and the CEO here at Zenphi. So, Andy, if you agree, let's get it started. I'm going to stop sharing because we don't need the slides for the next conversations that we want to have, so we can focus on the screen. So, Andy, why don't we start by getting your perspective on cybersecurity in general, where it's at, where it's come from, what are the main themes you see, and then I've got a few questions that we go through them one by one. So, yeah, if you could please give us your perspective on cybersecurity, that would be great.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I mean, I think you'd have to be have been living under a rock over the last couple of years to have not noticed how security has risen on the public agenda. There's been very notable, very high-profile attacks, certainly in Australia, against Medibank, Optus, and Attitude Financial. We see attacks on a weekly basis, on a daily basis. And then you've seen over in the US, you've seen Russian state nexus activity impacting Microsoft and the US government. So, it's really come up as being a massive topic that people are talking about over the dinner table. We've seen national governments implement regulatory changes. We've seen them launch strategies. The Australian government launched the 7-year cybersecurity strategy recently. That's focused on cybersecurity. And we've seen organizations grappling to get their cybersecurity houses in order, especially as we've sort of shifted, from the pandemic to where we are today into more of a digital transformation approach, and more specifically cloud adoption to make sure that we're able to work in as a hybrid workforce and from wherever we want to, from home or from the office. So as cloud adoption continues, it kind of means that we have to be more security conscious because our data, everything about us is in the cloud. We need to make sure that's protected. So it's kind of worth diving a layer down into the topic because a lot of people will understand cybersecurity. They'll understand the attacks that we've seen. They'll understand a little bit about how it's impacting their own organizations. But when we talk about cybersecurity, what are the organizations that we're really looking at? And so when you think about it, there's a difference between a few different groups. So you've got e-criminal groups. Now, e-criminals are your classic organizations that are financially motivated. So they would be the ones that would be targeting organizations to exfiltrate data or encrypt data and then demand a ransom to free that data back to the organization. And then you've got nation-state organizations that are aligned to national governments. So, the big four, the security organizations talk about China, Russia, North Korea, and certainly with what's happened between Israel and Palestine, you've seen Iran become a lot more active in their nation-state activity as well. And then you've got hacktivists. Now, sorry, I should say that nation-state nexus organizations are really focused on gathering information and intelligence. They're looking for a way to observe what's happening. You might have organizations linked to North Korea that kind of span across the criminal plane as well. They're looking at maybe getting funds for the regime. So you see North Korean adversary groups that are involved a lot in cryptocurrency thefts and those sorts of things. And then the final group, as I said, was hacktivists. Now, hacktivists would be more politically motivated. So they would be looking at putting forward a political cause. Mm-hmm. And now a lot of the stuff that they get involved in is DDoS attacks, website defacements, that sort of thing. And then when you look at the business of cybersecurity or cyber adversary groups, they kind of operate like a legitimate business. Certainly, criminals do. They have a help center. They have a phone lines that you can call if you're having issues with the ransom that you've acquired often, or if you're working with an access broker who's giving you access into an organization and it hasn't quite worked, you can give them a shout, and they actually work better than Apple in terms of helping you. It's crazy. It's insane. Like, they work and operate very much like legitimate businesses.
I'm sorry, Andy, I'm in trouble, but I heard in one of the news they've got their own negotiator, which is a legitimate negotiator when it comes on a call and negotiate with a victim.
Oh, 100%. 100%, because their main focus is to try and get you, put as much pressure on you as the victim organization to pay a ransom, right? Mm-hmm. So they've got to make sure it works. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think some of the things that people don't really understand about cybersecurity attacks is, particularly if it's criminal groups, oftentimes there's more than one adversary that's within a network. So you might well have the access broker who's got access to your site, to your network. They may sell that access to another organization who moves laterally within your network to a particular place where the crown jewels of data exist. Mm-hmm. And then they may work with a ransomware operator who initiates the ransom. And that ransomware operator may well have a negotiator who negotiates with you to make sure that you're paying the ransom. And as I've mentioned before, as governments implement regulatory changes, they work with those regulatory changes to put more pressure on you. So we've seen in Australia that directors are now much more impacted by breaches to their organization and held accountable. Now, they'll use that to say, well, you're going to get in trouble with the government. What you're doing is illegal, so you now need to pay us to get your data back. Otherwise, we'll reveal that you lost customer data. And that's going to impact you not just from a reputation perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a real challenge out there. One thing I wanted to share, Vahid, though, that I heard about when I first started with CrowdStrike. And it just made me think about how normalized cybersecurity and cyber attacks are. Now, someone said to me that, when you're trying to figure out which nation state actor is involved in an attack, one of the things you might do is look at public holidays. And you'll be thinking, well, what do you mean by look at public holidays? Well, they would look at if it's a public holiday on the day of the attack in Russia or China or one of the other areas where that there's nation state actors that operate, because a lot of these nation state actors are essentially public servants. So they would take public holidays off. They would have a lunch break. It just makes it feel very normal, the whole practice of cyber attacks. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's scary place out there.
It is, and it's it's really sad fact. It's a fact that it's happening. It's sad because it could impact people's lives. In some cases, the recent hack that happened in the payment system, insurance payment system in the States. It's actually, I was reading in a Wall Street Journal news that it's highest impacting people's life because 6 people going out there cannot get the service they're interested in. So it's really sad, but it's a fact that it's happening. It's unfortunate it's happening, but now we need to make sure we are ready for it so we don't fall victim of this. Now, and one of the misconceptions I had initially myself, a while ago, that these groups, they only target big organizations. They go after big organizations, So all the small ones, they're safe. No one's going to go after them. The small ones, meaning even the medium size to larger size. In my head, at some point in time, it was they go only after enterprises with hundreds of billions of dollars of assets, But is that true, Andy? I mean, who are they targeting the most? Who is the main target for these organizations or these cybersecurity hackers in general?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. There is that school of thought where if you ask small and medium-sized business owners, hey, are you concerned about cybersecurity? There have been a lot of reports and studies out recently, actually, that have suggested that small and medium-sized business owners aren't really that concerned by cybersecurity because they don't feel that they're going to get attacked. And actually, a lot of the time it's because they don't really think that the information and data they have is important. But the reality is this: if data is important to you and the operation of your business, then it's got a value. It's got a monetary value, right? So I could take that information, stop you from running your business, and you would then need to pay me to be able to operate again. And so why, what are some of the most common cybersecurity threats that, these medium and small businesses face today? Well, if you think about it, they've got limited resources and skills. So they don't really have a person or a team focusing on security. Like you would have in a large organization, you would have a security operations center, a SOC. So they've got limited resources. They don't have necessarily the skills to be able to identify when a threat is apparent within the network. They have limited budget to be able to use modern cybersecurity solutions, so they're vulnerable. And this means that they have limited visibility across the network, right? So they really don't have that 24/7 protection. You've got fewer employees. They're often wearing multiple hats. They may well not be 100% focused on specific areas. You don't have protection after hours or at weekends. And a major issue that SMB is impacted by a cyber attack, it can be a company-ending event, right? Because if you stop productivity for a few days, a week, if you demand a ransom payment, it's well documented that these smaller and medium-sized businesses, when impacted by a cyber attack, they've been known to go out of business. And so that's a massive concern.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and what about the education part of it, the knowledge part of it, the awareness part of it? That's the word I'm looking for. Of the smaller, medium-sized businesses, whether they're not aware of all these sophisticated schemas that are happening, or maybe they go and say, "Oh, they're not going to target me." I mean, we covered that one. But what do you think that lack of awareness is also a contributing factor there?
Yeah, and I think that there's often cybersecurity threats are often underestimated by businesses as well. When you think about the common ways that organizations are attacked, I mean, lack of cyber hygiene is a massive issue. And what I mean by cyber hygiene, it's things like just patching and updating your software, right? Because it seems like a very basic thing, but if you think about it, at its very primary instance, as soon as an organization like Microsoft comes out with Patch Tuesday and says, "Okay, there are these vulnerabilities in this software," that's essentially like saying you're almost giving a menu to e-criminals by saying, "Hey, attack these areas because there's currently vulnerabilities in these areas." And if you don't patch within a couple of days, within a day, you're leaving yourself exposed. You're leaving yourself exposed to attack. So it's really important to make sure that you're keeping that cyber hygiene up. And if you've got a workflow tool like Zenphi, for example, that can automate to ensure that the updates are always patched, they're patched in a expedited fashion, then you're going to be in a much better position.
Yeah.
Another area. You go. Sorry, Andy, I'm interrupting. So because you mentioned Zenphi, the other area, as part of Zenphi, we've got SMB customers as well, of course. So sometimes I do see that some of our users, some of them they ask all the right security questions, rightly so, from us. What are the practices you've got and all those things, rightly so they have to ask, and makes us really happy. But sometimes, we come across some of our customers using some of the softwares which are they shouldn't be using it, because Vahid might have gone and created a software with positive intention, but the software itself is not secure. So I'm talking about the supply chain attack. That's what's your take on those aspects? What do you see? Is the awareness raising, or should people pay a lot more attention to kind of platforms, software they use? Yeah, 100%. And just going back to cyber hygiene really quickly, it's not just an issue for small and medium-sized enterprises. It's for bigger businesses as well. They need to ensure that everything's patched, everything's updated. You can't leave things open to vulnerability. But when you talk about software supply chain attacks, when you talk about the supply chain in general, it's incredible how organizations don't judge their partners' security protocols as they would their own. Mm-hmm. And essentially, if you're extending an invitation to access your network with a partner, with a piece of software, whatever it might be, you're pretty much giving a key to open your front door to an organization. Now, if that organization is not is breached, if it's attacked, if it's breached, essentially the cyber attacker can laterally move within your network. They've got an access point there. And so, it's critically important to make sure that partner organizations, vendors, anyone who's got access to your network, that they have the same kind of rigidity around their security protocols as you do. They've got to see cybersecurity front of mind. So when you're having those discussions, when you're considering vendor adoption, have security as a part of that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, of course, I see it more and more compared to 10 years ago, compared to 5 years ago. More companies are asking all the right questions. And what we try to do is that, at least personally, I try to do, if someone doesn't ask, I let them know, these are the things you're buying us, and we want you to use us. But at the same time, I share these things, and you should be asking us all these questions. What are your software security practices? How do you handle the data? Do you have any third-party processor list in place so you can audit and all those things? So hopefully we see more and more companies start doing this, and becomes like a standard practice everywhere. So to increase the cybersecurity of the industry, level of the industry as a whole. So, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, just added to that point as well, you need to think about your own organization, and consider whether you have a security first mindset or a security first approach as an organization. And that comes from every employee within the organization considering security as an area of concern or focus for their particular role. And it could be anyone. It could be the director of product. It could be the person on reception. It could be whoever. If they have a weak password, if they're making it easy for the bad guys to steal their credentials, steal their identity, then you've got an access point. And so it's really important to make sure you're continually drilling down the benefits of a security first approach.
Absolutely. So it's a very nice point you're making, Andy. I mean, even in our personal lives, this applies. I keep asking my parents, do not share your phone's passcode. This is personal, nothing to do with business. Do not share your passcodes with anyone, because there's two things. First, they get access to your phone, but once they do, potentially they can somehow get access to me, hack my information. They can pretend to be you. Now, I keep telling them, and they're pretty good now. And it 100% applies, to the organization. It doesn't matter which level. To your point, even the you've got a reception sitting in the front, maybe doesn't have high access level, but it gives them the security, the key to your environment. From there, these organizations can find their ways. So, Andy, is there some of the cybersecurity myths that, we covered some of them. Is there anything you want to call out in terms of the cybersecurity myths?
Yeah, I think, we did touch on it at the beginning where we talked about, small and medium-sized businesses and how they're at a risk of cyber and ransomware attacks. And actually, there's been data in recent reports that have talked about there being a 70% of cyber attacks targeting small to medium-sized businesses. About 63% of small to medium-sized businesses have faced ransomware and advanced threats. And I think that's an area that that really puts it into stark contrast how organizations of all sizes are threatened. I think the other thing is, as you said before, access. People think, I just work in this team, or I just work in that team. I don't have access myself to where the really important data is. So why do I need my password to be secure? Why should I not click on that obvious phishing email? Well, the reality is that there's sophisticated cyber attackers today. They can move laterally within an organization, within a network, incredibly quickly. They can move to another host within a network before you've spotted them in your system. And then they can just go to a place where they find where they want to get to. They find the access point that does give them a route to that important data. And then before you know it, they've exfiltrated it. It's encrypted, and you've lost access to that information. So it's one of those myths that I think we really need to debunk. Small and medium-sized businesses are at risk. Regardless of your role within an organization, you are an entry point. And from there, cyber attackers can get to where they want to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. There was a podcast on one of the Wall Street journals about the recent MGM casino attack. Or was it? I believe it was MGM.
Yeah,
It all started with what they did. They called the support. They set someone's password. They got a hold of someone's password. That's it. That's the only thing they needed to get into it. And that someone did not have any admin privileges whatsoever. So what they did, they got into the network. They started infiltrating, putting malwares on different servers, one by one. So with these guys, when they started shutting the servers down, they infected, but it was already too late because it just replicated to other ones. From that server, I got access to the other ones. So something simple like that ended up costing them hundreds of millions of dollars. I believe they had to rebuild all the servers.
Well, they actually had to operate manually for a while.
Yeah,
they had to when guests were coming into to reception, they had to use pen and paper, manual processes, and that would have been an absolute nightmare. I think the other thing that's probably important to share is that people assume that when you talk about cybersecurity, you're talking about malware, and actually today, 70+% of attacks are malware free. So they're looking at ways to get into the organization without malware being a component, because malware carries a signature, and signature-based security solutions work by detecting that signature and calling it out. We recognize this is malware. Be careful. If you don't advertise like that, if you don't use malware, but you use legitimate credentials, stolen credentials and identities to get in, you're seen as a legitimate user, right? So it's then very difficult to be able to tell that you've breached the organization. And so, really thinking about how you're set up for your security is important, and monitoring, continually monitoring, making sure your zero trust approach is up to date. When I talk about zero trust, it's about how you're managing access effectively within your organization. Who's got access to what? Is that being constantly updated, constantly reviewed? Do you make sure that that you're trusting, you're verifying and then trusting, as opposed to trusting and verifying? So that's another area that needs to be thought of.
Cool. I've got one last question for you. I mean, there are quite a few common oversights that we covered when we were talking in the past 20 minutes or 15 minutes or so. What are the other? Is there any other common oversights that you see that could lead to successful cyber attacks that you'd like to cover here?
Yeah. Look, I think there's a couple of things. Now, in terms of a mistake, I mean, human error is obviously a big mistake. Sure. It's a big problem, and it happens. So if you've got the opportunity to automate processes, and this is obviously where Zenphi comes in as well, then you should do so. You need to do that to create certainty. But also when you're talking about, well, I guess organizations of all sizes, we're already busy. Time is such an important commodity today. If you can free up limited resources in your workforce to focus on more important tasks and some of the more mundane things, then they've got more of a focus on things like security, like the security implications of what they're doing, like configuring their new solutions, their new IT stack, whatever it might be, in the right way, so you're avoiding misconfiguration. Those sorts of areas are really, really important. I think the other thing to think about is, and it would be remiss of us not to talk about it, is the rise of generative AI. We've read you can't read an article today without there being AI or generative AI in it. It's everywhere. And it's proliferating more and more. When you look at AI and generative AI specifically in terms of a security perspective, now it's certainly more precise in terms of content. So when you've got your phishing emails, it's usually quite easy to tell if it's a real or a fake email, because the content that it's the language is incorrect, it's inaccurate, there's grammatical errors, those sorts of things. With generative AI, it's going to be much more difficult to tell. The other thing is, oftentimes cyber attacks occur in English language, because if you're a cyber attacker, you want to reduce the cost of doing business for yourself, right? You want to attack the widest way you possibly can to hit the most targets. And you're going to do that in English because it's the most widely used language in business. I apologize to my Spanish and French speaking contacts and friends, but that's the reality. With generative AI, it's much easier to target a multi-language and to do it very quickly. You don't have to be a language expert to be able to do that. And so generative AI is going to make it quicker, much more efficient to be able to initiate cyber attacks. So that's another area that really needs to be considered. But I think the automation of processes is really key.
Yeah. Now, very well said, Andy, and thank you for that. I mean, it's a very good segue to the next slide, which I've got on board. I was gonna talk about. Let me bring the slides back on for a sec. There it is. I'll find the dark number. So, the way we look at it, again, borrowing some of your page from your book, and the way we look at how Zenphi could help organizations in their cybersecurity approach. Of course, it's not going to solve all the problems. Like we discussed, it's a culture. You need to build it from the ground up. There's quite a few things to do, but we can help on a few aspects. One is reducing, to your point, reducing the human errors directly and indirectly. As in like by automating some of the security-related processes and auditing them well, and even using AI to monitor some of those aspects. The request for resetting passwords coming in. That's directly, and indirectly by freeing up resources to be able to focus on to your point, on the actual security important task that is coming in. Someone has got something, or you need to enter, create a user, enter a password or something. You pay more attention. You do it with a lot more attention there. So those are the two aspects in general we can help automate. We can help organizations in with their cybersecurity approaches. For the people who may not be familiar with Zenphi, Zenphi is a process automation platform. Basically, you can use Zenphi to automate various type of processes in your organizations, including IT administration. And in general, specifically talking about today's topic, these are some of the use cases we have seen very common for our users on Google Workspace. They automate, auditing their externally shared files on Google Drive, knowing that it's quite easy to share those files, and sometimes we forget to remove the sharings that could lead into data leaks. Or when someone configures an out-of-domain email forwarding rule within your organizations, you may want to take some action to avoid data leaks. These are the some of the security aspects that we can help with, and there's quite a few more along the journey. Now, here I'm gonna pause this slide and switch to the demo. I've got two quick demos for you, for Zenphi, about the two of these use cases. Then after once I walk you through the demo, we come back and we'll continue with the questions. Sounds good, Andy?
Perfect.
Yeah, we're gonna go back to the demo and then come back here. Okay, let's get it started. As I mentioned, I'm going to demo two different scenarios. One is auditing externally shared files on Google Drive. The other one is that taking action when an out-of-domain email configuration, email forwarding is configured. So let's get it started. So this is the main homepage of Zenphi. You've got the concept of the space. Each one of these is a space. There's a logical grouping of everything you need to automate the process, you put them in a space. I'm going to go into the Google Admin Workspace, create a new flow. Flow is normally a one-to-one mapping of a workflow or a process. So it's got a start and trigger. In real life, for this process, which is auditing externally shared files, you'd like to use a scheduled flow and configure it to run once a week, once a month, or once a day. But for testing purpose, I'm just going to use the on-demand trigger, which enables us to start the flow on demand. I'm going to give it a name, audit externally shared files. So in Zenphi, this is your flow designer. The process is like a flow chart designer. The process flows from top to the bottom. At the top, you've got the trigger. In our case, we selected the manual trigger, and then we can add actions here either by clicking on the plus button or just going down here. Now, if I go to the Google Workspace section, what I'm interested in is list users shared files. There's an action called user shared file. I drag and drop it. This action would give us all the files that this user has shared, and we can define the criteria we're interested in. So you can configure the actions by clicking on the cogs icon on the right-hand side. The configuration pane flows in, and we can start configuring it. First thing is selecting a connection. Connection is which authorizes the action to take the this step to take action on your behalf. If you don't have one, you can click on the plus button and create one. For this specific action, we want to say whose files you want to go and check or audit. So I can hard code this value. And the next thing is that which type of sharing are you interested in? I can say, shared the files which are shared with a link externally. I'm only interested in those ones, or the ones which are shared with a link and email address, external email addresses. If I select this option, I get another one down here which asks me to specify what domains do you consider as internal. So I say Zenphi.com and test.zenphi.com. They're internal. If the file has been shared with anyone whose email address is not at Zenphi.com or at test.zenphi.com, consider them external. And say where you want to search for. I can search for my drive of the user, all the files that the user has got access to, or the shared drive, or a specific shared drive the user has got access to. I'm just going to select my drive for now. Select files. I'm interested in files. Don't worry about the trash items. That's pretty much it. And there's a lot more I can configure here, how many files and all those things you want to process at a time. So I'm going to say this, but in real life, you don't want to hard code this value, right? You either want to audit everyone in your organization or audit members of a specific group. Let's take that example. Say we want to audit members of a specific Google group. So for that, I'm going to go and say there's another action called group information. So I'm going to configure this and say this is the group hr@test.zenphi.com. So as the output of the action, we can get all the group members. Now that I've got group members, I want to execute it for each member of that group. So as I mentioned, the flow flows from top to bottom. So I'm going to use another a step here called for each. I'm going to go here and say, go for each member of the group, and I'm renaming it for each member. Drag and drop it here, and it's going to execute whatever action I put in here for each member of that group. So now here, instead of hard coding the value, I can dynamically select the current member's email address, which is active in the loop that we are looping through. I'll leave the rest the same. Okay, so the action is going to get all the shared files for that specific user. Next thing we want to do, we want to create a report and potentially send it to that user. So I've got a Google Sheet template here, which I'm going to populate and send it to the user. Basically, I want to generate one of these per user and send it to the user to review and ask, hey, you've shared this file. Do you want to keep the permission, restrict the permission, or delete the permission? Let's see. Let's go back to Zenphi here. So I've got another action called, first I want to make a copy of that template. So copy file. Let's configure the action. It says which file you want to copy. I've got it here, here, and that's the one I want to copy. Make a copy of it. Where do you want to copy it to? I've got a folder called generated reports. Copy it there. And what's the name you want to give it? I want to give it a name of the member, the email address of the member, report. So copy the template file. Now that we've got a copy of it, we want to populate the new file. So I'm going to use another action called add multiple rows, because they could be multiple files which the user has shared. So I'm going to add multiple files to this template. Okay, let's go. Sorry, drawing here. Let's configure the action. Configure the action. Okay, file ID. Now the file ID is going to be dynamic. It's going to come from I can reference the previous action here. Do not previous action, the file ID. The sheet name is going to be link dash shared. Link dash shared. And I want to map this collection of the files that you have found and add them to the sheet. So I can load these headers dynamically as well, but for the demo purpose, I'm just going to add them ABC. It's quite easy. You just say it's got headers and you can load them. So again, for the demo purpose, I'm just going to populate the column A, B, and C, which are ID, name, and view link. So I say for column A, go and use the file ID. For column B, use the name. And for the column C, use the view link of the file. And once we have got that, well, we can take it further. We can assign a task to that person to review it. That's what you want to do in the real world, and then take action based on each file's indicated action, and take it forward. But again, for the demo purpose, I'm just gonna stop here and do a test run and see this in action. So let's do a test run. Let's start a new instance. And let's go back to the generated reports folder, monitor this folder. We should see a file getting generated for that user. So as you can see, it goes and gets a member. It has made a copy of the file for the first user. Let's see if the user has got any files. Yep, the user has got one file which is shared. And then let's see the second user, if it still getting processed, but the same action is going to get executed for the second user. As I mentioned, you can extend the flow. It's quite easy to say, take action based on these restrict the file or delete the file, and so that the user does not, remove all the burden from the end user, basically, to having to go to manually and remove the permission from 100 files or 10 files or whatever it is. So this is the I don't know what I clicked on. I'm going to close this, leave. Yeah, I don't want to save anything, and leave as well. It has already created for second user. Let's have a quick look at that one as well. This user has got a few more files which are shared externally. As you can see, it's quite easy to create these processes which proactively audits your potential data leaks in your organization. Of course, this is a simple version of the flow that I created. You can extend it to be really sophisticated, I've got a fully done flow open here. I'll walk you through it. Basically, it's the same thing. However, it caters for the situations where there may be hundreds of thousands of files. So there's paging. It caters for situations that you may be running this for quite a few people, and may hit the throttling issues or a quota limit of the Google Workspace that it enforces. So it's got error handling configured, so you don't have to, your flows don't fail if you have exhausted your quota for that minute or for that hour. It can wait and retry automatically. It caters for all of those things, and moving forward, creates a copy and notifies the users as well. That's really helpful. So that's to audit. But in some situation, you may also want to take action as soon as a specific file is shared externally. You don't want to wait for a month, but say you've got a Google Drive which contains really important files, and you just want to audit and know as soon as a file it gets externally. You can also do that. If I go back, let me step out of this page for a sec. I'm going to step out of this page and go back and see the flow that we have created for this. Let's come back here. Let's look at the flow. These are some of the flows. So for that flow, we use another kind of trigger called a Google Activity Trigger. So I already have created a flow when the visibility changes to external shared, notify IT. As you can see, we have created this Google Activity flow and say, for Google Drive, any event happens in Google Drive across all of my users, which results into visibility getting changed to external. Go and take these actions. In our case, we're just notifying IT. But you can go ahead and remove the visibility or notify security or let someone know that this has happened. So you can take immediate near to real-time actions on these events as well. So the other one I wanted to show you was when a user configures an out-of-domain email forwarding rule. So I've already created a flow for this. It uses the same Google audit activity actions. So basically, you can go back to Google Workspace and say, any one of these events happens, let me know. And then you can take actions on those ones in Zenphi. So in our case, I've selected the application is user account, and the event I'm interested in is out-of-domain email. You may be wondering, what are the sort of events that I can monitor? So you just go click on this link at the bottom of the trigger, brings you to the documentation on the Google side. So basically, any of the events that you see here, where you go to Google Drive, I'm going to dismiss this on the right-hand side. Whenever someone copies the file, someone downloads the file, or file is moved or previews or prints, you can monitor all those actions and events and take action on them. If I go for user accounts, for example, there are these actions. Two-step verification enrollment change. Whenever someone disables it, you want to take action. Or in our case, we are monitoring out-of-domain email forwarding. Whenever it's enabled, you want to take the action. And once you monitor that event, all the power of Zenphi is at your disposal. You can assign a task to someone to review the action. You can go and generate a document for that event and then merge it to another document to do it. For archiving purposes, you can create really, really comprehensive logics. On the other hand, there are many other processes that you can automate and specifically for Google IT. Creating a user, updating the user passwords, or simple thing that we were talking about, which can free you up from mundane work so that you can actually focus on the more important, maybe security related tasks. Something like creating Google group. It's quite common. Employees send requests to IT to create Google groups for them. You can do it manually, or you can delegate it to workflow automation like Zenphi to create those groups for you. You just need to review and approve or reject. You don't really need to go back to Google to create them, because you can delegate that to Zenphi and add the groups. There's an action for creating group and adding people to that group. So there's a ton here you can do, all calendar related, email delegate related, signatures, updating company-wide email signatures, or listing the file permissions, pretty much everything around files, they are there. On top of that, if you need, as part of the security practice, you need to automate with another platform, like maybe you monitor your task in Asana or another one. You can also integrate them. You can basically do it end-to-end on Zenphi, put the processes which can be automated on autopilot, both to be proactive and also in terms of auditing, and then freeing yourself up to focus on the more important tasks. Now that concludes our demo. I'm going to switch back to our presentation in a second. And bring Andy back on. Okay, hopefully you find those demos useful. Unfortunately, we have used it all the times that we had. I see there are a few questions in the Q&A section. Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer those questions, but I promise we're going to respond to those questions directly to you through email. Just before we wrap up, Andy, is there any final remarks you want to add, or is there anything you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Vahid. I guess what's really important is don't consider security as an afterthought. It doesn't matter what business you're in, what size business you're in. You're a target, and let's be realistic about it. You're a target, so you need to consider security. You need to think about how it can protect your business, and whatever part of the business you're in as well. You need to ensure that security is part of the workflow. You could be in any different part of the business, but you are an access point into that organization. And also, as we continue to work in the cloud, as we continue to digitally transform our businesses, it's important to work with companies like Zenphi to ensure you're remaining protected.
Well, thank you, Andy. As always, it was a pleasure talking with you, tap into your insights and experience, and I really appreciate the time. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thanks, Vahid. Appreciate you having me on board.
Thank you.